calling for a peaceful vote in a presidential election being seen as the tightest in Nigeria's history. Security is central to both leading candidates' campaign. But what else is likely to influence the outcome? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Fuli Batibo and welcome to this special edition of Inside Story, focusing on Nigeria's presidential election, a vote being described as the closest in the country's history. Incumbent President Goodluck Jonathan is facing a strong challenge from former military ruler Muhammadu Buhari. The continuing battle against the armed group Boko Haram has dominated the campaign, but there's a lot more at stake in a country of contrast and contradiction. Nigeria has Africa's largest population with more than 170 million people. It's also the continent's biggest economy, with the value of all goods and services topping $500 billion. And it's one of Africa's largest oil producers, turning out some 2.5 million barrels a day. That accounts for roughly 90% of foreign income and 2/3 of government revenue. Then there is another side to the story. Despite its vast potential, latest figures from Nigeria's Bureau of Statistics show almost 2/3 of Nigerians live in absolute poverty. Half of the population has no electricity, while the international NGO WaterAid says 2/3 of people don't have access to safe water. And even though Nigeria exports crude oil, it is almost fully reliant on imports for the refined gasoline it consumes. Well, let's bring in our guest now for today's discussion. In Lagos, we have Japheth Omojua. He's a columnist with Nigeria's The Punch newspaper. And from London, we are joined by Manji Cheto, Vice President of Teneo Intelligence and a risk analyst on the political economy of Sub-Saharan Africa. Welcome to you both. Thank you for being on Inside Story. Japheth, in Lagos, if I may start with you, there's been a lot of focus, of course, on security and the fight against Boko Haram in the international media. But what is the foremost concern of Nigerian voters as they head to the polls this Saturday?
The foremost concern would be power. The fact that they don't have power, they would understand it better if I said light. The second issue is the issue around jobs. There are no jobs. The economy is set to be growing, and it does look like it, boosted by oil production and sales and oil prices before the decline. But there is no direct correlation between that economic growth and the people's lives.
Manji,
those are the two main issues.
Okay, so you see those are the two main issues.
And some other things.
Okay, there are obviously a lot of issues, but in your view, those are the two main issues.
Yes, of
Manji,
course, apart from insecurity.
Right. Manji, in London, what do you think should be the priority of whoever wins this presidential election?
I mean, obviously, I think, for one, internationally, I think Nigeria's image has actually been damaged as a result of a lot of the scandals that have come out. So from an external position, I mean, I think Nigeria needs to deal with the issue of corruption, which actually seems to be the kind of main perception problem that Nigeria suffers from. And also domestically, when you look at the statistics for Nigeria, and then you look at the development statistics as well, there's a huge disaggregation between those numbers. And I think people are starting to feel quite frustrated with the fact that the country has always been on the brink of potential, and that potential has yet to be realised. So for a new government, I think corruption, beyond the security challenges, needs to be one of the main focus areas.
All right. Well, let's take a look at one of the areas that's turning out to be a big issue for Nigeria today. Al Jazeera's correspondents are in the country reporting on these main issues affecting this election. And Harun Mutasa has been in the Niger Delta in the south, which is home to most of Nigeria's oil, but also one of the poorest regions.
They know what they are doing is illegal, but they don't care. Young, unemployed men steal crude oil from pipelines, then refine it in the creeks of the Niger Delta. They say this lucrative resource belongs to the community, not the Nigerian government or oil companies.
They are eating our money. So when you have something and somebody is eating it, he will be pleased with it. Then you who owns it, you will be angry, isn't it? So that's what is happening. So we look for how to get part of it.
The men claim to produce around 60,000 litres a day from their improvised refineries. Look at what this business is doing to the environment. This place used to be lush and green. Locals say there are more than 200 refineries in the area, but they say they need the money so they can look after their families. Falling global oil prices means less foreign currency is earned. For poor Nigerians, their problems keep piling up. Prices of basic commodities are rising.
So there's no money in circulation, things is there to buy. But when you go to the market to buy them, you cannot be able to afford to buy it the way you want to buy it.
A well-armed joint task force made up of forces from all security sectors patrol the creeks. Oil accounts for about 15% of Nigeria's gross domestic product, but it makes up 75 to 80% of government revenues. Government finances have been hammered by the slide in world oil prices.
It's been very tough. Almost 40% of the revenues we get wipe off. And I mean, with the amount of developmental work this particular administration has gone into, we've had to look at so many cost-cutting strategies to help us continue to keep afloat and to also pay salaries.
For those struggling to get by, this cheap, often low-quality fuel is affordable. One use they have for it, powering up generators. Despite being one of the largest producers of oil in the world, Nigeria is still battling to meet its energy needs. Haruma Tasa, Al Jazeera, in the Niger Delta.
So, Japheth, in Lagos, what then do you see as a central problem today with Nigeria's oil industry?
The central problem, I'll be repeating Mandy, I think the central problem is first of all corruption and the fact that there is no political will to deal with the oil theft. Some 400,000 barrels of Nigerian oil is being stolen every day, and those are government figures.
But
now,
who is really behind this
about
oil
1,000
theft?
tankers of oil being stolen every day.
It's not just the villagers who are behind this this oil theft. It's more complex than that. Do you think the government is complicit?
This is an international oil gang that you have to agree and believe that highly placed people in government are involved, because there is no way you would move 400,000 barrels of oil, some 20-25% of Nigeria's daily production, and the government and the security networks in the south would not know about it. So there is no question about the fact that highly placed Nigerians, highly placed people in government, highly placed people in the Nigerian security setup are definitely, without a question, involved, based on the logistics that you need to move 400,000 barrels of oil out of this country and even within the country.
Manji, do you share that view? Do you think that when it comes to oil theft, as we saw in our report there, that there is complicity within the Nigerian government?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talk about the issue of corruption, we also need to break it down. One of the main reasons why corruption continues to thrive in the oil sector in Nigeria is opacity. I mean, Nigeria's national oil company, for years and years and years, a lot of people have complained about opacity, complex bureaucratic processes, and in all that quagmire, I think a lot of information gets missing. You never really know what part of the oil company is responsible for what. That is a main concern, I think, when we talk about corruption here, because when the word corruption gets bandied around, but no one ever says, well, what can we do to address it? And I think, from my perspective, that really is the main issue: transparency.
In 2013, the former Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Lamido Sanusi, alleged that $20 billion in oil revenue was missing from state coffers. And as soon as he made that allegation, he was sacked. So do you think the Nigerian government is really serious, Manji, when it says it wants to tackle corruption in the oil industry?
I mean, from my perspective, it's very difficult for a government to say that we are trying to tackle corruption with no high-level prosecutions, first of all, and also with investigations that tend to be quite prolonged, and also once the investigations are launched, the details of the reports that are released are not really made public. I think that really is affecting people's perception. So for your ordinary Nigerian, I think you'll find that most people don't believe that the government is moving fast enough on corruption.
Japheth, in Lagos, Muhammadu Buhari, of course, has a reputation for being tough on corruption. Do you think he will deliver if he is elected as president of Nigeria, or is this just campaign rhetoric?
I mean, there is no question about the fact that this person is desperate about saving this country from corruption. I think we have to look at the fact that he's running for the 4th time. I don't know how many people have that energy to put themselves up every other time and lose 3 times in a row and still have enough belief and energy to come back again. So I think there is no question about it. He knows he's old. He doesn't have so many years to really live, because I mean he's 72 or thereabout.
But it's not just him though. I mean, once if he comes to power,
to do as much as he can.
Sorry to interrupt you, Japheth. I'm sorry. It's not just Muhammadu Buhari, though. He can say that, you know, he wants to fight corruption, but if he's elected and comes to power, there are a whole lot of people around him who are not necessarily going to want him to tackle this corruption, this rampant corruption.
Yeah, that's a very good one. The thing is, if the head is rotten, if the head of the fish is rotten, the fish is finished. The central problem we have with corruption, whether in the oil industry, whether with the fight against Boko Haram, whether with Nigeria as a whole, is leadership. If people cannot find a great example in the president, it's going to go down to the bottom. If the president, hopefully, and I'm coming out now to say it, hopefully if it is General Buhari, and he shows a very good example, and he lays the rules on the ground from day one and says we're not going to accept this, I think it's going to eventually trickle down to the last man in the chain of production, whether it is oil or whatever we're talking about. So it's not just going to be all about him, but his body language, his direction, his words, his commitments, the decisions he takes, the incentives his government puts in place, the punishment they put in place will eventually affect what happens to the industry. So yes, it is not all about him, but it's a central, now the president is a central player in what happens with respect to corruption and moving the industry and Nigeria generally forward.
Briefly, do you agree with what Jared just said, Japheth just said there, that, you know, Buhari would be more able to take on corruption than Goodluck Jonathan has?
I'm far more, I think, realistic about these things, and I think the simple answer is we don't know. However, the fact that he's campaigned on that is something that you can expect people to hold him responsible for if he doesn't move on it. And, you know, for me, I don't really think that the issue is about one man. It's about the institutions. If you go back to the point that I made earlier about the National Oil Company and opacity, I mean, that is an institutional problem. And I don't think that, you know, it just takes one man. Nigeria needs to rebuild a lot of its institutions.
Okay. Now, let's look at another issue now that's central in this campaign. As we've been saying, security is, of course, dominating the election campaign. But according to the international NGO WaterAid, a shortage of drinking water and poor sanitation killed more people last year than Boko Haram. Al Jazeera's Mohammed Ado reports now from Nigeria's biggest city, Lagos.
The water vendors of Lagos, the men who form the backbone of the city's informal water supply. On a good day, the city's water company supplies 945 million litres of water, enough for just 7 million of the city's 20 million residents. And that is where the water vendors come in, to fill a void and supply the rest of the city's population.
It's a hectic job as the demand for water is high and we have to work long hours, but it pays well.
Their customers are far from happy though. Julia Chijoke is a housewife. She says she spends $30 every month on water from the vendors.
So I feel bad. I feel very bad. So I think the government to come and help us to put water, so they will fix water for us. So we will not buy any water again, and easy for us.
Another group cashing in on the water shortage in Lagos are the owners of the growing number of water treatment and bottling plants. This factory alone produces 1.5 million bottles of water a day. The city water company says it can't afford the massive cost of improving and expanding its plants to satisfy demand.
So we have put in place the master plan to develop about 8 large water schemes to be able to support a mega city. To execute the master plan, we're looking at an investment portfolio of about $3.5 billion. That is an investment that the state government cannot solely fund.
The Lagos state government is now looking for private investors. Without them, the people of Lagos will continue to struggle for good, safe drinking water. Mohammed Ado, Al Jazeera, Lagos, Nigeria.
So, Japith, in Lagos, on this issue, this failure to provide the most basic services like water today in Nigeria, do you think this can be solely blamed on the current government?
You cannot totally blame it on the current government. Every government, the state governments are also responsible. But let me say that you cannot distribute water without power. And power is centralized in Nigeria. For instance, the Lagos state government has been building independent power plants. And I know that some of these power plants also power water distribution, and they work 24 hours of the day. But here is the catch. There's a limit to how much of this they can do. They cannot make it available for commercial production because of the laws in Nigeria. You can only make the power plant function in public places. So there are functional street lights in Nigeria, in Lagos now, for instance. That's why you see the president always coming to Lagos for his events, because Lagos is always lit up. But there is a limit to this. So if we can decentralize power generation and distribution, it would affect the availability of water, because one of the major issues is that you need power to distribute water. But it's not just about the federal government, it's about every government, the state governments, even the local governments and the federal government, collectively understanding the fact that the current laws do not help us to be successful, especially the laws around the generation and distribution of power. Because yes, they said they've liberalized the sector, but it's not a truly liberalized sector, because just months after the liberalization, the government was already using about 200 billion naira to bail them out, after some of them already donated to the president's campaign. So all of this is just, it doesn't show signs of a liberalized sector, especially when independent companies are controlling different parts of the country.
Okay, Manji in London, does privatizing the power sector help alleviate some of the problems, in your opinion?
Obviously, from my position, I've looked at the power sector in quite a number of countries, and it's quite clear to me that the monumental cost of the infrastructure development that needs to happen in the sector is one that the government cannot take on its own. So I think, it was a positive move on the Nigerian government's part that it has made, that it has actually moved to privatize those companies. I mean, but I think the problems are probably far more complex than just a policy issue. I mean, you're looking at a country where for over 2 decades now has not invested in power development and in power infrastructure. So of course, I mean, the privatization was only completed really in 2013. It's going to take a much longer time. There are other things in Nigeria, the tariff issues are not right, and that also has a knock-on effect, I mean, on the water issue, to bring it back to that. But beyond the electricity challenges, I mean, I think we also need to look at infrastructure. Right. The way that a lot of the cities in Nigeria are developing are actually, they're not really well planned. And so the infrastructure and the water connections from the water desalination plants to a lot of homes is also not there.
Is there, let me ask you this, is there, when it comes to these basic services like water, electricity, is there a north-south divide, rural versus urban area divide?
I think it's more a case of urban-rural divide. In urban areas, obviously, because of the higher concentration and the higher population density, a lot of governments in the cities recognise that their own ability to actually continue to maintain power is dependent on the ability to provide infrastructure. And also the cities tend to be a lot richer. They're able to generate their own revenues that is divorced from the state. So it's been a lot easier to do it in the cities, where in rural areas, it's a lot harder. And also because they're so much further from the centre, it's much harder for them to actually make the demand to the centre to actually get the infrastructure development in these areas.
Okay, let's take a look at another issue now, and that's religion and ethnicity in Nigeria. Nigeria, of course, is a religiously diverse nation, and this election is pitting Goodluck Jonathan, the incumbent, a southern Christian, against Muhammadu Buhari, a Muslim from the north. Now, alternating the presidency between the two regions had been considered something of a unwritten rule, if you will. Well, here's Mohammed Ado again from the religiously mixed central city of Jos.
Song and dance on the busy streets of Jos, the capital of central Nigeria's Plateau State. Behind every step here, there is a serious message. A rejection of violence during elections this weekend.
Our message is 1 man, 1 vote, 1 woman, 1 vote, 1 youth, 1 vote. It should be done peacefully. No killing of anybody.
Nowhere is this message more relevant than in a city known for its ethnic and sectarian violence. Jos is a melting pot of Nigeria's different ethnic groups. It's also religiously mixed and in some ways divided along those lines. Deadly clashes have erupted here since 2001. The conflicts rooted in disputes over access to land, power and jobs almost always took a religious turn. Yet the city was once known for its peaceful coexistence between Muslims and Christians. Yahya Kwande, a Muslim, has been married to a Christian woman for the past 45 years. A former diplomat, Yahya also led a presidential commission tasked with investigating the religious crisis in Plateau State. He blames politicians for the conflict.
If you have nothing to give your followers, economically, morally, educationally, or even health-wise, an empty-head politician will pick the religion to replace them.
Tension has been high in Jos ahead of the elections, the closest contest in Nigeria's history. And these are the men trying to diffuse those tensions, leaders of the two main faiths in Jos.
I worry a lot, but worries don't solve problems, so I pray. And then I try to engage in dialogue, like we have done before with the Chief Imam at the Dialogue, Reconciliation and Peace Center.
If we want to elect our representatives, we can do, but no case of religion inside.
Challenges that will... For now, representatives of the church and mosque continue preaching peace everywhere. They hope their call will be heeded, and this time, Jos will choose peace over conflict. Mohammed Ado, Al Jazeera, Jos, Nigeria.
So, Japheth, in Lagos, religion, of course, very sensitive in Nigeria. Have the politicians exploited, do you think, this issue during the campaign?
Without a question, from PDP to APC, everybody has exploited a religious and ethnic divide. The choice of candidacy, the choice of promises during the campaign, even this morning, the president's letter to the north, to northern Nigeria and northerners, everything around the campaign has been, virtually everything has been around religion, ethnicity, and the default lines around Nigeria's diversity.
Manji, in London, do you think that this will, after the election and results are announced, that this will become a big issue, the issue of religion and the divide between North and South?
I think Nigeria over the last 2 decades has been going through an ethnic and religious clash, and I think that that's not going to go away after the elections. Unfortunately, I mean, the religious divide in Nigeria is actually triggered a lot by political disparities. I mean, in a lot of the areas, particularly in a place like Jos, where over in the early 80s and the 90s, I mean, there was peaceful coexistence. Right. A lot of the conflict started when people were struggling for power, economic power and both political power, and politicians exploited those divisions to actually get people.
And Boko Haram also exploited this, didn't they?
Absolutely.
So both candidates have signed an agreement, have called for peaceful elections to prevent violence. Do you think people will heed that call? Will they easily accept the results of the election?
I do think it's quite positive that a peace pact has been signed. I do believe that whoever loses the elections will actually call for peace. But the problem is that the ethnic divide and the religious divide has been driven so deeply by politicians to a point where they've actually created what I call fringe supporters, people who, have actually, the sense of division is so entrenched that, there is a risk that even if senior politicians come out to call for calm, that people will not heed to those calls, and actually it might take security forces stepping in to actually restore a level of stability. I hate to say, but I think, that's where things have gone.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens in the next few days, of course. Thank you both for being with us today. Manji Cheto in London, Japheth Omuja in Lagos. And thank you for joining us. If you have anything you'd like to add, you can go to our program page at aljazeera.com. You can also post your comments on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or send your tweets to @AJ Inside Story. I'm Fuli Batibo from the whole team. Bye for now.